You for joining again. Oh, we're recording. Yeah, as I said, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to the webinar. And thank you so much for joining. I see we have a few people online, and that's excellent. Thanks so much for participating. So my name is Diana Gonzalez. I am a senior research consultant at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney in Australia. And I will be moderating today's webinar. So today we are here with the RWSN Early Webinar Series, and we'll be talking about supported self-supply, and we'll be presenting case studies from 4 continents. So before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes that this webinar will be recorded. We're recording already, and the recording and presentations will be shared afterwards with everyone who registered and whoever wants to catch it afterwards as well. Please continue to introduce yourselves in the chat, share your name, your organization, and the country you're joining from in the chat box. So that's the one marked with the green square in the bottom of that slide, which is different to the Q&A box, which is marked with the yellow box around it. So in the Q&A box, please send us your questions for the presenters and the panelists. And then keep the chat for also other comments and introducing yourself. And then at the end of this webinar, please also fill out a short survey that we will share with you to help us to continue to improve the webinars and the events that we organize. Next slide, please. So today, what's on the agenda is just a little bit of setting the scene by me. So I'm also the RWSN Self-Supply Theme Co-Lead. Then we have 5 presentations. The speakers are James Mihelsik from the University of South Florida. Then we'll hear from Ratan Butatoki from SNV Nepal, followed by Tim Foster, who's my colleague and also RWSN Self-Supply Theme Co-Lead. Then we have a recorded presentation from Isabel Dominguez from the Universidad Industrial de Santander in Colombia. She's not able to join us live because of time difference. And we'll finish the presentations with Henk Holstad from the Meta Smart Center Group. Then we'll have some time for Q&A. And please, as I say, as presenters are speaking, add your questions and questions to the presenters in the Q&A box, and then we'll wrap up the webinar with some closing remarks. So just to open and set the scene, just wanted to share a couple of thoughts with you. This is my picture, this is me. And as I said, I'm a senior research consultant at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS and a co-lead for this self-supply theme. So as I mentioned, in the next slide, as I mentioned, I am in Australia, and here we begin meetings and formal events by acknowledging that we are living and working on land that was taken from the traditional owners, and this is called an acknowledgement of country. And so today, before we really dig in and dive into the topic, I'd like to acknowledge that I am joining this webinar from the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, what most people know as Sydney. And I want to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people across the lands and waters of Australia. And I recognize their connection to country, and I thank them for caring for and maintaining these lands and waters over thousands of years. This picture here is this year's National NIDOC Week poster, and there's a link there that you can read a little bit about the artwork once we share the slides with everyone. So let's get into the topic. So in our next slide, it's just through this webinar, we wanted to pose the question in a way of what do we mean by supported self-supply? And we want to explore what supported self-supply means across different continents. So specifically 4 continents we have case studies from. And really supported self-supply could mean different things to different people and in different contexts. And the level of support that is provided could potentially fall somewhere on this spectrum that we have here on this screen on this slide. And there could be other stages of supported self-supply that we've not thought about that are not included here. But what we have so far is starting at the left end with no acknowledgement of self-supply, even though we know there's so many people, millions of people, in fact, relying on self-supply for the drinking water service. And there could be simply no acknowledgement of that household level investment and management, and really people providing their own drinking water. There could be some acknowledgement in policy, but not much more. Some governments or some countries in which there is mention of self-supply, maybe not specifically calling it self-supply, but it could be acknowledgement that people have their own rainwater tanks, or people have their own borewell and boreholes and water supply systems. But that's as far as it goes. It could be that there are standards and guidelines developed to then, think about how are they supposed to be built or maintained, or what are the standards of water quality that should be met in self-supply systems. It could be moving on to capacity development for how to maintain those systems or how to improve them, all the way through to subsidies and financial support and more natural market forces that support self-supply. And so today we want to share with you 5 case studies or 5 presentations from different continents, and see if you can spot where today's case studies fall on this spectrum, or if there are other stages, as I said, of supported self-supply that are maybe missing. Or maybe, we can discuss at the end whether they're just more sort of emerging self-supply case studies, and maybe not all of them we would consider supported self-supply. So in my next slide, I've got a visual summary of what are those case studies. So we have case studies from the 4 continents, as I mentioned. So we will start with number 1. There is Madagascar. So we will hear about research on pitcher pumps in Madagascar. Then moving over to Nepal, we'll hear about the reliability and safety of self-supply in the Terai region. Then moving over to Fiji, we will hear about the government's subsidized rainwater tank program in rural areas. Then we'll travel to Latin America, and we'll hear about the emergence of self-supply in Colombia. And then we'll end in sub-Saharan Africa with a case study from Smart Tech and the work that they've been doing there. So as you can see, we're doing a whole world tour of self-supply, exploring what is self-supply, what are the different case studies, and what can we learn from all of them, but also what do we consider supported, and are they supported? Okay, so I think we can move on. I think that was all from me in terms of opening remarks. So we have 5 presentations, as I mentioned. They've all been pre-recorded just to help us with time management, and also to avoid any technical issues, any technical problems that are always happen. Hopefully I've not jinxed it. But first of all, we will hear from Dr. James Mihalcik, and he is the Samuel L. and Julia M. Flo Endowed Professor of Civil and Environmental Engineering at the University of South Florida. He is internationally recognized for education and research contributions in the areas of sustainable development and wash engineering, and has authored 4 engineering textbooks.
Hi, everybody. I'm James Mihalcik. I'm here to talk about self-supply in Madagascar, and specifically an unsubsidized market for pitcher pump systems. My co-authors here are Jeff, Addy, and Mahmouda. And I know specifically Mahmouda will be joining for the Q&A because she's currently in Madagascar. So before I get, you can imagine there's a lot of people to thank for this: faculty, students, our Malagasy NGO partners, Rentosica, the manufacturers, technicians that produce and install these pump systems, health professionals, and in the National Research Lab. So we thank them for it along with our funders. So I'd especially like to thank not just my three colleagues that I acknowledge on the title slide. On the bottom row, Luke and Luva are our NGO partners, Rentosica, which is based in Tomasina, Madagascar. And then many of you know Mike McCarthy. And so Mike initiated this study when he was a doctoral student with me. And unfortunately, he passed away very suddenly a few years ago. Okay, our timeline here. So I want you to see two things from this slide. It's kind of complicated. One is we've been working in Madagascar for quite a long time now, over 15 years. And our efforts to support self-supply include not just information on the self-supply system that I'll talk about today, but extensive microbial and lead water quality analysis, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of water samples. We've modeled and measured blood lead levels from exposure, not just from water, from diet, because if you cook a starch like rice in lead contaminated water, that starch will absorb the lead. And then we also have strengths in social marketing to understand how to change behavior. And in this case, it's been applied to the pump manufacturers, installers. Okay, self-supply Madagascar. So traditional self-supply systems include development of household wells and to a limited extent some household rainwater harvesting systems. In the central part of the country, you see household hand-dug wells. They're typically with a rope and bucket system. And in coastal areas like where we work, the groundwater table is shallow, the soil is sandy, so you can manually drill a well and attach a suction pump to access that water. And this technology was introduced into Eastern Madagascar over 60 years ago. There's a map of Madagascar. That red area is the area that we work. We work mainly in Tomasina, in its outskirts. Tomasina is the second largest city in Madagascar, and it's a port city. So we estimate there's 9,000 systems in Tomasina alone, accessed by over half of the population. A conservative estimate is the number of these systems installed in Madagascar is over 12,000. And we estimate these systems are built, installed, and maintained by a little over 50 small businesses located in Tomasina. So what do these systems look like? So if you go to the market, there's some pumps that are for sale in the market, usually outside of some welding shop. The manufacturer installer will come to your house, a percussion auger in sandy soil. They'll drive a well point into the water table, and then on top of that well point, they'll attach a finished pump. And this is what some of those 9,000 pumps look like once installed throughout the city and area. Okay, and again, with these kind of pitcher pump systems, there's a well screen below the water table, and then on above the ground surface is the pump that you see. How much does a system cost? So complete system at an unsubsidized price of 35 to 100 US dollars. Again, this is data from 2013. So this is construction and installation. The price of the pump is about 15 to 25 US dollars, and with the additional costs being charged per meter of depth to the water table. Manufacturer makes a profit about 15 to 25 per pump, and all the households that we surveyed installed these without subsidies. So in contrast, if you want to connect to the public water supply system, you pay an initial cost of 215 US dollars, and then you have a tariff. So this is obviously prohibitively high connection cost and water tariff. And when we talk to pump owners, they identified several attributes that they find important. So one is the low purchase cost of the item and the low maintenance costs, reliability compared to a community well or the piped water system, and then also convenience, right? Proximity of their water system to the homestead compared to like a community water point. Okay, I want to transition to water quality. So you can see in this figure, there's a household. There's a latrine in the upper right, and then below it, I've circled the pitcher pump system. So I'm going to just focus on chemical water quality or lead, but we've also have a paper that you can access or ask us for that talks about the microbial contamination and how we deal with households about that, right? Because you can imagine that latrine is hydraulically connected to the pitcher pump system. Okay, there are leaded components we discovered in the pitcher pump system. They occur in the piston and foot valve, or the two check valves in the pump, and then also below the water table, the well screen is brass, which contains some lead, and then also there's lead tin solder. We've watched manufacturers previously, they take old car batteries, they melt the lead down on a charcoal stove, and then they make a little mold in the ground and they pour this lead weight. And then see on the right, they're attaching that lead weight to a piece of leather, and that becomes part of the piston valve. Okay, now we also discovered that you can remove the lead and you can replace it with something like scrap iron. So this is an example of it being done with that valves. And we've now remediated over 1,000 pumps replacing these leaded components in the pumps. So, and we've done extensive water quality sampling. Our team's expertise in social marketing through Professor Khalik has identified the key leverage point in the system is the pump manufacturers, technicians / artisans, right? They're the people that they now perform the remediation as part of a new business model, because those pump components wear out every couple years, so they need to be replaced, right? So you can see over time the people that are maintaining the pumps can remove the lead components. And in terms of reducing lead exposure in self-supply, I have several references here at the end that you can access to learn more. But replacing the leaded pump components, specifically the piston and foot valves, with non-leaded components, it decreases aqueous lead levels below the WHO guideline of 10 micrograms per liter or parts per billion in 96% of pumps tested. We've measured children blood lead levels now, and we found a statistically significant decrease from pre to post pump remediation. Furthermore, that remediation resulted in a decrease in the blood lead levels for 87% of children. Our results indicate the importance of working with the informal sector. You know, these 50-some manufacturers, they're not organized in a professional society. They're not under the umbrella of one business, right? So, but these pump technicians no longer use lead in pumps unless specifically requested by pump owners. And these results indicate a positive shift towards the use of lead-free components with project follow-up and analysis ongoing. So this might be a question for the Q&A. And the reduction in blood lead levels is estimated to provide an economic benefit of close to $12,000 per child. And this represents a return on investment of greater than 1,000 to 1, which is quite significant. Okay, so in closing, here's a bibliography of our work, either student thesis or journal publications. You can contact myself or Addie or Mahmuda to learn how to obtain a copy. And there's a wealth of information here. And that first reference specifically talks more about the self-supply in Eastern Madagascar. It was published in Water Alternatives, but lots and lots of work on issues of the microbial and chemical water quality and potential health risk associated with this very unique unsubsidized self-supply market. So with that, thank you for your time, and please contact me if you have any questions.
Great, thank you. And if you have any questions regarding this presentation, please write them in the Q&A. So next we're moving over to Nepal, and we're going to hear from Ratan Budatoki. So Ratan is a project leader for climate resilient rural wash with SNB Nepal, and he has technical and managerial background with over 30 years of professional experience in the wash sector, working with global and national development organizations.
Greetings to all. I am Ratan Budatoki, working as a project lead for SNB Nepal. Today, I am going to present results from a baseline survey that was conducted as a part of the Beyond finish line project implemented by SNB in Nepal. This work was supported by DFAT under their Water for Women Fund. This program was implemented in the rural districts in Tarai, which is a region where self-supply is widespread. Self-supply is common mode of water supply in rural Nepal, particularly in the form of private tube wells. Based on the most recent census data, around 8.5 million people in rural areas have a tube well on their premises, which equates to 38% of the rural population. Self-supply is common in Tarai region. It is estimated that more than 1 million private tube wells have been installed across the Tarai. The preponderance of private tube wells in the Tarai is driven by widespread availability of low-cost drilling and strong supply chains for low-cost suction pumps. The most commonly, the number 6 suction pump is as found in a number of other Asian countries, including Nepal, India, and Cambodia. Now I would like to brief you the results of baseline survey of self-supplied drinking water conducted by SNB Nepal. This survey took place in Sarlahi district, which is largely rural district in the Tarai. The district has a population of around 860,000 people, the two-thirds of whom obtain their drinking water from tube wells. During the survey, we collected data from 1289 tube wells, including both community tube wells and private tube wells. We also captured information on a range of aspects. When we looked at private tube wells versus community tube wells, we found the private tube wells were typically less likely to have sanitary protection in place relative to community tube wells. For example, private tube wells were most likely to lack a concrete platform, more likely to have open defecation nearby, and were more likely to have a sanitary facility within 10-meter distance. That said, community tube wells were more likely to be exposed to some risks, including stagnant water nearby, the lack of a fence, and need to primer the pump prior to operation. Despite elevated sanitary risks, private tube wells perform better on average than community tube wells. We found that private tube wells were more likely to be free from E. coli and arsenic contamination and were more likely to have continuous operations without a breakdown. Private tube wells were, however, slightly less likely to provide water that was considered sufficient in quantity for domestic needs. When we combine all of these parameters together, private tube wells were more likely to provide water that was both free from contamination and available in sufficient quantities when needed. In other words, self-supply or private tube wells were more likely deliver service levels that meet the safely managed water service criteria than community tube wells. We also conducted some statistical analysis in the form of logistic regressions to understand whether certain disadvantaged groups relying on self-supply experienced different service level to more advantaged groups. Specifically, we looked at households with a female-headed households including persons with disabilities, and households from lower castes. The analysis revealed two important inequalities. First, we found that lower caste households were significantly less likely to have self-supply water that was both free from contaminations and available when needed. Second, we found that female-headed households significantly less likely to have self-supply water that was available when needed. Finally, we also observed two significant predictors of E. coli contamination in self-supply water. First, shallow tube wells were significantly associated with E. coli detections, as was the occurrence of open defecations near to the tube well. In addition, in 2023, drought heat area of Sarlahi was affected by drought and causing over 2,000 tube wells dried. SNB provided with designing and construction support with accessible tap stands and water storage tanks. We also supporting the rural municipalities to prepare the climate resilience water plans. So, in conclusion, our study has two main takeaway messages. First, self-supply, when in the form of private tube wells, can deliver a safely managed water service and provide a safer and more reliable water supply than community tube wells. The second message, the targeted support should be directed towards disadvantaged households to safeguard water quality and strengthen service reliability and ensure equitable outcomes to the people. Thank you.
Thanks for that presentation from Ratan in Nepal. I see some questions coming through in the Q&A box, so please keep them coming. And next up, we have a presentation coming from Fiji. So this presentation by Tim Foster. So Tim is a research director at the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures in Sydney, Australia. He's my colleague, also co-lead of the self-supply theme. And he has more than 10 years of work experience working on rural water supply issues across Africa, Asia, and the Pacific. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Tim Foster and I'm from the Institute for Sustainable Futures at the University of Technology, Sydney. Today I'm going to present to you an overview of self-supply in the Pacific region and also describe a case study from Fiji that has seen the national government provide funding to subsidise household rainwater tanks in rural areas. So before I begin, I'd just like to acknowledge a number of organisations that have supported the work that I'll present on today. Various parts of the presentation have been supported by UNICEF, both through the Pacific Multi-Country Office and also the East Asia and Pacific Regional Office. Some of the work has also been supported by the Water for Women Fund, which is an initiative of the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So first I'm going to take you through some of the statistics for self-supply in the Pacific region. This slide shows you the estimated prevalence of self-supply in 9 of the larger Pacific Island countries for both urban and rural areas. So we find that about 17% of the population in urban areas practice self-supply and about 14% of the population in rural areas. In 7 of the 9 countries, self-supply is more common in rural areas, but in 2 of the larger countries, Papua New Guinea and Solomon Islands, it's more common in urban areas. But all told, about 1 in every 7 households in the Pacific self-supply their drinking water. And to give you a bit of context, I've highlighted these same 9 countries with a red star here. And as you can see, they comprise literally thousands of islands spread across a vast area. To give you a sense of the distance, it's about 7,000 kilometres from the western border of PNG and the easternmost island in Kiribati. And all told, there's about 12.7 million people across these countries, but when you take PNG out of the equation, it's about 2.6 million. And a large proportion, about 80% of the population across these countries live in rural areas, which generally means islands which are remote or hard to reach. Now, self-supply comes in a number of different forms in the Pacific, and these are some examples from just a couple of islands in Vanuatu. Typically, rainwater tanks, whether poly tanks or ferrocement, are a common form of self-supply, but you do get groundwater self-supply to a limited extent in coastal areas. This slide is similar to the one before, but it breaks down self-supply in the same 9 Pacific Island countries by source type. So the blue colours represent protected wells and boreholes, the green colour represents unprotected wells, and the red colour represents rainwater tanks. And as you can see, rainwater tanks are the dominant form of self-supply, and they account for about 4/5 of all self-supply systems. Kiribati is the only country where household wells are more common than rainwater tanks. And one country which has a relatively low proportion of households who capture and store rainwater is Fiji, which is the case study country I'll get to very shortly. Now, as with any water service model, it's important to understand equity aspects and the degree to which the service can be accessed by lower income households. And what we see in the Pacific is that in a number of countries, rainwater tanks are more likely to be owned and used by wealthier quintiles in the rural areas. The exception to this, however, is Fiji, as you can see in the bottom left-hand corner, where the poorest households in rural areas are the most likely to have a rainwater tank on their premises. Now, one of the interesting things about self-supply in the Pacific, particularly rainwater collection, is that government strategies and plans often acknowledge the role of self-supply and are supportive of it. So here we have some policy and planning documents from Vanuatu, Solomon Islands, Kiribati and Fiji, all of which articulate a desire for mechanisms to promote household ownership of rainwater collection systems. The most developed of these is the Fijian example, which is on the right there. And in Fiji, there are guidelines for a formal scheme to provide subsidies to support rural households to invest in a rainwater collection system. And that is the initiative I'm going to describe in some detail now. So this initiative is outlined in national budget documents and, as I said, outlined in national guidelines. The scheme itself is administered by the Water Authority of Fiji, which is a national government-owned utility. Now, under this scheme, households can apply for a 2,700 litre polytank on the condition that they invest the equivalent of 30% of the overall cost in preparing an adequate base for the tank and also guttering system. These tanks are manufactured locally in Fiji and supplied directly to the households. The scheme itself has a 7-step process from promotion of the scheme and formal application through to inspection, approval and delivery of the tank to the household. So on the left you can see each of those 7 steps, and then in the middle of the slide I have a couple of snapshot of a few of the forms and standards that govern the scheme. So as I said, this scheme has been expressly budgeted for in Fiji's national budget documents, and over a 7-year period, just under 20 million Fijian dollars have been allocated, which is equivalent to about $9 million USD. Now, these are the numbers for the program as of 2022. So all up, there've been about 25,000 applications, which have translated into about 12,500 tanks delivered to end users, with another 4,000 or so pending. So an assessment of the initiative was undertaken last year, and this assessment identified a number of strengths of the program, but also identified a number of challenges that the program had faced. So starting with the strengths, the program has enabled public funding to leverage household funding, about 4 million Fijian dollars or $2 million US dollars, and this has provided a greater impact and reach to more households than would otherwise be the case. The program has also likely saved government funding through a reduced reliance on rainwater carting in rural areas. Some of the challenges observed included the difficulties that suppliers had faced in keeping up with demand, the logistical challenges of delivering rainwater tanks to remote and hard to reach areas, and then finally the susceptibility to damage for these tanks during extreme weather events. So I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for joining us for the webinar and presentation today, and very happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Right, thank you. So that was our case study from Fiji. As you can see, quite different in terms of support for self-supply. So now our next presentation is coming from Colombia. So we will hear from Isabel Dominguez. Isabel is an associate professor at the School of Civil Engineering of the Universidad Industrial de Santander in Colombia. And her research areas include water management, rainwater harvesting, multiple use of water, interaction between water and participation, rural water supply, self-supply, and hydrological services analysis. And so Isabel, she's in Colombia. It's a very ridiculous time there now, so she's not joining us for the Q&A afterwards. But if you do have questions for her, please put them in the chat or in the Q&A chat box, and we will pass on the questions to her, and hopefully we can respond to them offline.
Greetings from Colombia. My name is Isabel Dominguez and I'm a lecturer in the Civil Engineering School at Universidad Industrial de Santander. I'm happy to talk today about the self-supply approach in my country. My talk will address general aspects of rural Colombia, how access to water is in rural Colombia, and how self-supply has been increasingly considered a suitable alternative for accessing water in the scattered rural areas in my country. Finally, I will show you a case study on our most recent work on self-supply. Let's talk a little bit about Colombia. Colombia is in the northwestern part of South America. It is administratively divided into 32 departments and geographically divided into 5 main regions with strong different characteristics. For 2024, the population was estimated around 52 million people. As you might be aware, Colombia has suffered an internal armed conflict since the 1950s, which has promoted an internal migration of people from the rural areas to the cities, which has resulted in a predominantly urban country where only 18% of the population, about 9.5 million people, currently lives in rural areas. However, despite the concentration of the population in the urban areas, especially, the country is predominantly rural, with about 76% of the municipalities having rural characteristics, which in practical terms means that the rural population could reach about 15 million people. The map shows a rurality index where dark green areas are considered less rural, while lighter green areas are considered more rural. Data from the last rural census developed in Colombia in 2016 showed that the livelihoods of rural people depend totally or partially on agricultural activities. This census found 2.9 million rural households where 81% developed agricultural activities such as crops, livestock, or both. However, access to land is unequal since 75% of the rural households had sizes smaller than 5 hectares, which is very small farms where people hardly can develop something beyond subsistence agriculture. These small farmers have barriers or lack access to agricultural production factors needed to increase their productivity, as we have seen with land, but also education, machinery, technical assistance, and infrastructure, for instance, irrigation. This can be evidenced in the behavior of the multidimensional poverty index when comparing urban and rural areas. As we can see in the graph, this index is much higher in rural areas than in urban areas. The lack of water and sanitation systems in rural areas is part of the factors with a higher impact on the index. Therefore, access to water. We also see a gap between rural and urban areas as well. Data from 2022 indicates that coverage of safely managed water was 40% in rural areas and 81% in urban areas, and the coverage in rural areas has remained almost unchanged in the last 22 years. With this background, let's see how self-supply has been increasingly incorporated into the legal framework and institutional strategies to improve access to water in the rural areas of Colombia in the last 2 decades. In 2000, we had the first technical regulation regarding the design of water supply systems. It included guidance that led to planning rural water supply systems under a urban approach. The only differentiation it included for rural areas was that per capita allocations depended on the number of inhabitants in the settlement. Therefore, it was lower for communities with less than 2,500 people, but no upper limit was set for communities with more than 12,500 people. Therefore, this regulation increased inequalities in access to water. In addition, it indicated that water provided should be potable only from surface or groundwater sources and preferably through centralized infrastructure. In 2007, the government published a policy, the Departmental Water and Sanitation Plans for Managing Water, Sewerage, and Solid Waste Services. This policy was focused on regionalizing and strengthening the business management of services. This resulted in better conditions for urban areas, while rural areas were left in charge of municipal authorities, which in most cases had low capacity to undertake water and sanitation projects. In 2007 as well, the International Multiple Uses of Water project, funded by the Challenge Program on Water and Food, started in Colombia and 5 other countries. In Colombia, the Sinara Institute at Universidad del Valle, as part of this project, collected quantifiable evidence of rural people's water needs and practices and contrasted this with institutional practice and mandates. A learning alliance of researchers, practitioners, and communities was established to collect the evidence, reflect, learn, and make proposals to influence policymaking for planning rural systems. In 2011, as a result of this project, we published the book Guidelines for the Planning and Design of Multiple-Use Water Systems in Rural Areas of Colombia. Sinara continued working closely with policymakers, and in 2014, the National Department of Planning from Colombia published the first policy for water supply and sanitation specifically for rural areas. For the first time, this policy recognized that approaches to providing water for rural areas should be different to those from urban areas. From this policy, there has been a continuous regulatory development through laws, acts, and resolutions that recognize the different approaches required for water supply systems in rural areas, including design, financing, infrastructure, water quality, post-construction support, and information systems, among others. In this new approach, self-supply is a valid option for households in scattered areas. The latest regulatory development in 2022, the National Development Plan regarding self-supply, establishes a commitment to ensuring access to a vital minimum of water that has universal provision, especially for the most vulnerable population. After this general background, I want to show you some details of our most recent work in self-supply, which was developed in a small area in the Santander department, the Garbanzal village. This village comprises 39 scattered households, where 93% were involved in a small-scale livelihood such as agriculture, animal husbandry, or both. People used multiple water sources for both human consumption and productive activities. However, collective systems were not reliable, water was inadequate in quantity, quality, or both, and this situation led people to build rainwater harvesting systems at the household level, where they found this was the most reliable water source for their needs. All households had rainwater harvesting systems built and financed by themselves. 93% of the households had between 1 and 3 tanks, mostly less than 2,000 liters, mainly made of plastic or concrete. The stored water did not meet quality criteria for human consumption in parameters of apparent color and total and fecal coliforms. Most people did not remember how much they invested in these systems, but 48% said they invested between $37 and $123. Despite everything we saw before regarding progress on the institutional framework to support self-supply, this community lacked any institutional aid for the construction, financing, operation, or maintenance of these systems. Therefore, it is essential to develop mechanisms to materialize these institutional mandates in the territory effectively. As part of our work in Garbanzal, we developed a multi-criteria tool for selecting rainwater harvesting systems in scattered households from rural areas considering social, technical, and economic criteria. The tool was developed by systematically identifying subcriteria and their hierarchization through HHP and TOPSIS, and this was validated in the Garbanzal case study. We identified 7 subcriteria, as you can see in the table. We carried out users consultation about the perceived ease of use and availability of water sources other than rainwater, system dimensioning to establish supply size, maintenance requirement, and required water quality, and cost and benefits estimation, including small-scale productive activities. The tool validation in Garbanzal considered the evaluation of 3 alternatives with different uses, as you can see in the graph. And from this study, we proposed a systematic methodology to assess and prioritize rainwater harvesting systems, appealing to policymakers, engineers, and practitioners, which can be used as support to the implementation of the recently developed regulation that allows to consider self-supply as a viable approach to provide water for the rural areas in Colombia. This methodology is summarized in this figure, but for more information you can access the link to the publication on the slide. Many thanks for your attention. It is a shame that the time difference prevents me from interacting with you while you were watching this presentation, but I will happily answer your questions by my email, which is in the slide. Thank you very much again.
Wonderful. We thank Isabel for her presentation. Very interesting case from Colombia. The last presentation we have to end up on a more going back to Africa now, we have a presentation from Henk Holstak. So Henk has ample experience with low-cost technologies for self-supply, like rope pumps, which are simple but not easy. Henk has worked with others to collect technologies for wells, pumps, storage, and treatment that can be produced locally. And he is an advisor of the Meta Smart Center Group, who train technicians in 9 African countries. I'm sure his name is known to many of you in the self-supply world, and we're very happy to have Henk's presentation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Henk Holtslag. I've worked in rural water supply in the last 35 years. Most of my experiences with failures, but also some success. I'd like to share some experience on how Sustainable Development Goal 6.1 in rural Africa can be reached with supported self-supply at a one-time cost of $25 per person. Challenges in rural sub-Saharan Africa include over 300 million people that lack safely managed or basic service. There's broken hand pumps, often due to lack of funds, and other water-related challenges include food security, poverty, and lack of jobs. So what would the investment cost to serve 300 people be? Safely managed with pipe systems cost at least $150 per person, so a total of 45 billion. Basic service with kiosks and imported pumps that serve 250 people cost on average $25 per person, but most countries have low population density like Zambia, and conventional technologies will cost at least $50 per person, so $16 billion. A basic model with locally produced technologies and supported self-supply would cost $25 per person, so a total of 8 billion. And the condition for this case, of course, would be that one well is used by 5 to 10 families, and in case of storage tanks, that there is at least 200 millimeters of rain per year. Some examples of supported self-supply. In Zambia, the Yakana Smart Center subsidized 600 wells that were installed at one family. There was only one condition for the subsidy, and that was generate income. The results now are that a well of $1,000 serves on average 40 people, so that is $25 per person. 90% of the pumps are functioning, and there is demand creation, so over 300 families paid a well or a pump 100% themselves. In Tanzania, around 2008, some 700 hand-drilled wells and rope pumps were subsidized. And now there is over 15,000 rope pumps, and 80% of them are paid for by families. In Sierra Leone and Gambia, there is some 5,000 Amos wells. Poor families get a subsidy, richer families pay themselves. In Nicaragua, there is 50,000 rope pumps installed on farm wells, and their incomes increased on average $225 per year. So the total increased income in 20 years is over $100 million. And this started with $2 million aid money for training. Self-supply is possible with locally produced smart techs. And SMART stands for simple, market-based, affordable, repairable technologies. There's no time for details, but in short, the cost of wells of 25 meters deep start at about $250. Amos pumps can pump from 35 meters deep and cost $40, and rope pump costs $120. Solar pumps start at $200, and storage tanks of 7,000 liters start at $150. Household water filters, which is essential for self-supply, start at a cost of $20. So in short, a combination of these technologies make water supply possible at a cost of $25 per person. Some numbers. There is 100,000 hand-drilled tube wells. For instance, in 80% of the water supply in Lagos, in Nigeria, is tube wells made with rotary jetting. There is 350,000 pedal pumps, like the Moneymaker. There is 120,000 locally produced hand pumps, like rope pumps, Amos, Kansi, or Mark V pumps. And water filters are produced in Ethiopia, Malawi, and Uganda, and over 800,000 have been sold. So what are keys for these successes? First, market-based. Products need to be attractive, effective, so people are willing to pay for them. They need to be affordable and repairable. The local production guarantees low cost, local skills, and local spare parts. The ownership. One family is the owner instead of a community. Profit. Generate income so there is money for maintenance. And training. Long-term coaching to guarantee quality. A hard lesson learned is that options like a rope pump may be simple, but simple is not easy. And that is valid for both technical and business and social aspects. A proposition. Where manual drilling is possible and water levels are less than 35 meters deep, it is more sustainable to make 5 small tube wells of $1,000 per well that each serve 50 people than one large borehole of $6,000 that serve 25 people, 250 people. And I would like to hear your opinion in the discussion later on. There is also concerns with self-supply. One is water quality. Who is going to control it? A solution is point-of-use treatment, chlorine, boiling, or a water filter. Another concern is depletion of groundwater. What if millions of farmers drill their own well? A solution there is infiltrate all rainwater to recharge the groundwater. For instance, a simple tube recharge can recharge 100 cubic meters per year at a cost of $20. With a technology called deep bed farming, all rainwater infiltrates in the ground, also on slopes and with heavy rains. And another effect of this deep bed farming is that yields of rain-fed crops like maize can double or even triple. In summary, the effects of this way of supported self-supply include that SDG 6 with basic service costs $25 per person and is possible in areas with more than 200 millimeters of rain per year. There is less problems with pump maintenance, and there is impact on the SDGs for poverty, food, gender, work, and climate. So suggestions are to shift from imported technology to also local production, from few wells to large groups, of few wells for large groups to also more wells for smaller groups, from community managed to also family managed systems, and from domestic use to also water for productive use like irrigation or livestock. And important to scale is training. Some effects of training of the smart centers. For instance, Mr. Muzamala in Malawi, in 2010, he was a well digger with a bike, and now he has a company with a car and 3 drilling teams. Mr. Kadume in Tanzania, he was trained in the years 2005, and his company now drilled over 3,000 wells in Tanzania. So how to scale self-supply in a sustainable way? One is create knowledge center in each region to show and train in the most cost-effective options for each situation. And a large-scale South-South knowledge exchange. If you like more information on the smart approach, you can go to the website of the Smart Center Group. And for deep bed farming, you can go to the website of Tieni. Thank you for your attention.
Wonderful. So thank you to all our presenters. I'm sure you all agree, and I can tell by the number of questions coming through that they were all very interesting case studies and examples of self-supply to different experiences of how they self-supply was supported in each of these contexts or not. And obviously in some of them it was more emerging studies and understanding what is the self-supply situation, and others we were going a bit beyond that and just understanding how they were supported and how that can be improved as well. So now we have a poll for you, and so we have 6 questions, and so we would like to hear from you. What are you thinking now that you've heard these case studies, and yeah, what's your opinions on these 6 questions? So the poll window should have popped up on your screen already, so please scroll down so that you're able to see all the 6 questions, and you can vote and respond to questions at your leisure. I'll read them so that we know, and the people watching the recording afterwards know what were the questions that we asked. The first question is, do you think self-supply has a role to play in reaching SDG target 6.1, safe drinking for all? Do you strongly agree, neutral, disagree, or strongly disagree with that? The second question is, in what context should self-supply be supported or promoted? And here you can select all that apply. And the options are in remote and sparsely populated rural areas, or in rural towns and growth centers, or in peri-urban areas, or in densely populated urban areas, or none of the above, or all of them. Where should self-supply be supported or promoted in terms of population and rurality. The third question is, in what context should self-supply be deterred or discouraged? So this is the opposite. And here we can also select all that apply, and they're the same options: remote and sparsely populated rural areas, rural towns and growth centers, or peri-urban areas, or densely populated urban areas, or none of them. And I think it's important to note there too is that self-supply, I think we can acknowledge that it can be supported and promoted in some contexts. In some other contexts, it might not be the right solution, and there might be other concerns. So then that's the question number 4 is, what are the main reasons, in your opinion, for deterring self-supply? And here you can select all that apply. Is it because of water quality risks? As we saw from the presentations, there were a lot of water quality risks with self-supply, and it's a concern. Is it because there's the risk of groundwater depletion, as we saw in Hank's presentation there at the end? Is it because water supply is the government's responsibility, and therefore we shouldn't put that on families or households to manage? Or is it because centralized water is more economically efficient? Or do you have any other thoughts or any other reasons why self-supply should be deterred? Question number 5 is, in context where self-supply could be supported or promoted, what do you think the role of government should be? Is it to recognize self-supply in policy and planning, or to include self-supply as an option in programming and implementation, to create enabling environment through training, catalyzing supply chains and technology development? Is it to develop guidelines and standards for self-supply, or to provide subsidies for self-supply, or to provide monitoring and regulation, or none of them? And the last question is, in context where self-supply could be supported or promoted, what do you think is the role of NGOs? And the options are the same. So to recognize it in policy and planning, to include it as an option in programming and implementation, to create the enabling environment, to develop guidelines and standards, to provide subsidies, or to provide monitoring and regulation? Or do they have no role in supporting self-supply? So those are the 6 questions and options. Might give you a couple more minutes in case someone hasn't responded yet or still reading through the options. I think we're still missing about half the people haven't voted yet, so please let us know what you think. And this is also, take this as an inspiration and warming up for the Q&A part of the discussion, where we want to hear from you and what questions you have. So we'll go through the Q&A box, but hopefully this also inspires other questions that you might have after listening to the case studies as well. Getting the numbers up. We'll give it a couple more minutes. Sorry, moments, not minutes. And if you have also other questions, please add them to the Q&A. And so we'll move on to that in a moment. Okay, we'll close the poll now. Thank you for sharing your thoughts. So the results, I hope you can see the results on your screens as well, but we'll go through them, and for the speakers and the panelists, please also jump in and share your thoughts and comments and impressions from the poll as we go through. So feel free to unmute yourselves and interrupt me at any time. But yeah, the majority, or yeah, pretty much everyone thinks, either strongly agrees or agrees, that self-supply has a role to play in reaching SDG target 6.1. I think not surprising for our audience, but also I think it also raises a question of what more should we be doing in terms of the SDG agenda and the monitoring and the promotion of self-supply as that viable pathway for ensuring safe drinking water for all. Because I think piped water is often seen as the standard, and yeah, it seems like we agree we should acknowledge and do more to promote the role self-supply has to play in SDG 6.1. So the majority of respondents, 85% of respondents, or of us and the audience, think that self-supply should be supported or promoted primarily in remote and sparsely populated rural areas. And then that is followed by rural towns. So it just seems like self-supply seems to be perceived as a solution for rural populations mainly, and because I see the results sort of decrease as we go into more urban, so we move from rural to urban areas. It seems like, we think self-supply should be more of a focus in remote rural areas. And then that the opposite is true also for in what context should self-supply be discouraged. Most 60% of us think that densely populated urban areas, there should be self-supply should be discouraged in these locations. And a quarter of us think that they shouldn't be deterred or discouraged at all, self-supply systems. So that's interesting. Question number 4, what are the main reasons for deterring self-supply? Primarily, the main reason is water quality risks. 85% of the audience think that that's the main reason for moving away from self-supply. I think a lot of research and evidence suggests that precisely, that water quality risks are a main concern, a main issue, and a main reason for moving away from self-supply if there are other safer options. Question number 5 is, in what context would self-supply, in context where self-supply could be supported or promoted, the main role of government is recognizing it and developing guidelines, and creating enabling environments. Basically, all of them are important, and the same for the role of NGOs. So thank you so much for sharing those, your opinions on that. So now we will move on to Q&A. Thanks for your patience. You'll notice just one change, a new face on our Q&A speakers. So we have with us Dr. Mahmouda Khalid Pasha, and she's an associate professor and the director of for the World Health Organization Collaborating Center on Social Marketing and Social Change at the University of South Florida. And so she'll be able to speak to the Madagascar case study, and she has been responding to some of the questions in the Q&A box for the Madagascar case study. So we also have Ratan and Tim and Henk, and as I mentioned, Isabel is not able to join live, but we have these 4 wonderful speakers live with us right now, and so we'll just go on to some of the Q&A questions. If more questions come up, please, you know where to put them. I think I've said that enough times already. So I will start with a question that I think is directed to all of the speakers. Oh, yeah. So Balkisa Bashir has asked, do environmental, cultural, and socioeconomic factors influence the implementation of supported self-supply in different regions? And it would be great if you can speak about what you saw from the other case studies and what you've seen from your own experience. And maybe I'll start with Tim. You can sorry, you can share what you think on that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Deanna, and thanks for the question. I mean, maybe I'll just focus in on the environmental factors first from the Pacific perspective. So, obviously, rainwater harvesting or self-supply in the form of rainwater harvesting needs adequate levels of rainfall, and certainly in the Pacific, there's a lot of rainfall that facilitate that in Melanesia, Fiji, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, where rainwater harvesting is very, very widespread. So that's a big part of it. And rainwater is considered to be a really clean and pure water source as well. In contrast, groundwater self-supply is not very common in the Pacific, except for Kiribati, and that's largely a function of, I think, hydrogeological conditions and the ability to access shallow groundwater at low cost, because it's difficult to reach for many communities, in particularly those that live away from the coast. So maybe I'll pause there and let others chime in from their contexts.
Maybe Diana, I can compliment also from in case of Nepal. Thank you for questions. Yes, I think definitely the environmental or maybe the climate changes and effects and the social context really affects the self-supply availability, technology, and then also the services also. For example, in one of my case, from just last year, one of the Palika has been suffering with the long-term drought, and all the groundwater shallow tables that people were using. Now they had to find a deeper kind of boring, and because they do not have adequate infrastructure to collect the rainwater, because rainwater is not, drought means no rain, less rain, and then definitely that is affecting the shallow tables, and people are trying to find the deeper kind of groundwater tables, and also that also creates a conflict, dispute between the communities and better off and the I think the ultra poor families. So the duty bearers are also suffering how to deal with the situations. So definitely that affects, I think, on management, on availability and technology use and services also. Yeah.
But Hank or Mahmuda, would you like to add anything to that question or to the answer?
Yeah, I can add just from the Madagascar context, in relation to the factors, like I think cultural and socioeconomic factors play a because you could bring in a self-supply that may work, but if it's not part of the habit and if it's not part of the culture, it doesn't get incorporated into how, and there's not sufficient training, as Hank was mentioning, then there's an issue with implementation. And then the second element that I wanted to bring up, again from a cultural, socioeconomic, and environmental perspective, is that you could have quality of the water and the safety of the water is the issue. And we've now subsequently worked on projects related to improving the quality and the safety of the water by point of use disinfection of storage containers and other things. And we run into issues again from a cultural and socioeconomic perspective where the cost may be too great, it may be physically burdensome. And then the other element is it's just not something that they do. And it's not part of what to understand the community's context to fit what you're proposing better with who they are and how they work. So those are some things that we've seen from our work in Madagascar.
Okay. Hank, would you want to add anything, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, move on to the next question.
Okay, great. So there's a question from Sally Sutton to Ratan. Is there any idea of how the new SNV community wells are affecting self-supply and vice versa? Do any self-supply owners shift to community supply? What are the technical reasons for poor performance of the community supplies, i.e. not related simply to community, not private ownership?
Okay. Thank you so much. I think I have also responded on the question answer, as an answer also. Definitely, it was not our intention was not actually to come up with the kind of this community kind of supply systems. But as I mentioned in 2023, we were helping supporting local government and the communities to still improve the quality of self-supply systems in Tarai. But last year, it was a kind of over 2,000 shallow tubes were dried for May, June, July, August, and the local government was in very much pressure to fulfill the requirement of the immediate water supply services. So they started just installing the deeper tubewell over 200, 300 deep feet depth, and they also used the electricity to extract the water. So we saw that the water was going wastage everywhere, and then in terms of managing the water and helping the people to use the water properly and economically effectively. So since it is not a hilly and slope and the short distance, so within the 100-meter periphery there are number of more than 150 households are more dense populations. So we just help them to manage that water, and with kind of accessibility of the tap stands for persons with disability, women and children. So that was our kind of immediate response on the water management, effective management. But it is not going to be, I think, totally the community managed, but it is, I think, if the drought situation continues and the groundwater level is not available, perhaps the local government and the supporting agency and community have to come up with the middle path, not only self-supply, but it is a kind of middle option. So that is one response on this one. But in terms of the community tubewells, particularly the government supported or Palika supported some tubewells for ultra poor families. There are common tubewells, people are using those tubewells. Actually, they are, I think, lacking the ownership. Like, for example, there is a water logging, stagnant is there, and then there are no fans, and then there is also a kind of, the people had to do a kind of priming before the water operating the tubewells. So that means every time they go to that tubewell, and that is not, again, they have to go with the water and then do a kind of priming and get the water. So I think those were some of the reasons that community tubewell were not functioning so well. Perhaps maybe if additional points, maybe team also can help to me to answer. But I think these are the, I think, valid point. Of course, those are, the depth is there, but from the operation maintenance and taking care and managing the community tubewells is a little bit challenge in Tarai. Yes, I hope I have tried to respond to the questions, Sami. Yeah, thank you so much for the questions. I think that's very important question. Yeah.
Thanks, Ratan. I hadn't noticed you'd already answered in the in the chat. Apologies. So there is a question for Henk from Arto, and he says, you say that the subsidy to reach SDG 6.1 for 300 million people is $8 billion US. Who, in your opinion, should pay this?
Good question. The 8 billion is a rough estimate. It's not an exact number, but I think the subsidies should come from anyone who is interested in reaching SDG 6 in rural areas. I mean, we have been talking now for 20 years of leaving no one behind. 80% of the SDG 6 target group lives in rural areas. So if we want to leave no one behind, we need to support the poorest that do not have even basic service, let alone safely managed. So I think everyone, that can be governments, NGOs, donors, whoever is interested that everybody should have safe drinking water, can fund it. It's not one big project. It can be thousands of small projects with the same concept.
Thank you. There's another question from Peter Obara, and I think it will tie in nicely with your experiences, all of you, because it talks about the implementing public-private partnership frameworks. And so the question is, what are the experience and challenges in implementing public-private partnership framework, if any, in Nepal, Tanzania, Malawi, Zambia, Colombia, Madagascar, and Fiji, especially when we speak of private operators in water supply and sanitation services? So obviously there's a side of supply chain also needed, and how do you, what is the relationship and yeah, sort of link between those private operators in formal markets, as we saw also in Madagascar, for improving self-supply?
To whom is the question? Is this?
It's for all of you, so whoever wants to take it first. I think Mahmouda and Henk, you both maybe.
Yeah. Well, from my side, I see two target groups. So one is the people that do not have basic service, who in general, they need the subsidy to get the SDG 6, the safe water. But there is many private operators that is also self-supply, people who invest themselves. I gave the example from Lagos. I mean, Kirsten Dernat did a study in Lagos that where 80% of all the water supply is provided by private people. Some only one family, some people that have a borehole and sell water to the others. So there is many opportunities. But I leave the question to other people also that have more experience in the water companies.
Yeah, I will say just from the question in terms of public, primarily private at the moment. There hasn't been a lot of influence or working with more the public sector on this. It's local individuals developing these pitcher pumps, and the work that they've done. When we've done some of our projects, we've tried to incorporate the Ministry of WASH and others as a way to support successful or haven't really started it. They've been informed of our work, but we haven't gotten to that point. And so that's what I can speak about. And then also typically it's a compound with up to 6 to 7 families, and one individual owns the pump, and then everybody else is using the water that comes from the pump.
Yeah, in case of Nepal, definitely, like in my presentation, over 1 million shallow tubewells are already installed in number of areas. So, which is a kind of the market, the supply chain, strong supply chain is nearby the India border. So the tubewells and spare parts are available, and the people are preferring to install the individual water pumps. Also, it is earlier like groundwater source was also easily available everywhere. So people were preferring to that one. But the people and the families who are with the ultra poor families, they are still relying on the community water points. So now, after 2017 onwards, the local governments are the responsible duty bearers to supply and manage the water supply services for those people. So from that perspective, I think they have already been doing a kind of some collaboration with the private sector, like driller, private masons, skilled masons, with those, but a kind of proper systematic partnership approach with potential and with enlisted private sector has not been happened systematically. I think that is feasible, but it also will depend on how the local government and leadership and the technical planning persons and facilitating agency are organizing. But it is happening in one or other way, but not well organized way, I would say. So that's, I think it is feasible, but there are areas of improvement for creating the role and responsibility to make the service available throughout the year and as and when needed. I think that's the response from Nepal. Yes, yes. Over to Diana.
Over to Tim. Did you have any thoughts on that question, Tim?
Just briefly, I mean, I think in the context of the the Fijian case study that I presented, I mean, a thriving kind of private sector and supply chain for rainwater tanks was really a prerequisite for that program. There were some challenges, I think, in terms of the government's objectives, particularly around the quality of the tanks that were being produced, but also the geographical coverage of the supply chains that the existing supply chains didn't cover the sort of areas that the government wanted to cover. So I think there was a bit of work, I guess, to make those align. But otherwise, yeah, I think that partnership was absolutely.
Thank you. Hank, did I see your hand up? Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to add to the water quality, which is one of the biggest concerns on self-supply. And I saw the other question from Larry Siegel also. Self-supply, we think, should automatically become combined with any kind of water treatment, because the question on who is going to control the quality, the answer is nobody. I mean, not even with the public supplies are we able to control the quality, let alone with self-supply. Self-supply is the responsibility of the family, but the government and NGOs are responsible to focus on the importance of treatment at the household level. So wherever there is no security that you have 100% safe water at the house, we promote treat your water at the household level. And there is many good new technologies. I mean, there's very efficient filters that can be assembled locally. And in Malawi, they cost $15, a complete water filter. In Ethiopia, they cost $22. So a big challenge is start to treat your water at the household level, wherever there is no guarantee for safe water. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a great way of ending the discussion. And that's a really good message of supported self-supply takes you so far. There are some things that families still need to do to manage safe self-supply on their own. Thanks again to all our speakers. We just have a couple more slides to share with you before we close the webinar. But thank you again, everyone, for joining, and all the presentations will be available on the RWSN website and Vimeo, so you can check the recording. And then, our final slide. Thank you. This was the fourth webinar in the webinar series. There is one more webinar coming up next week, Stop the Rot, and tackling the quality challenge. So if you want to participate, know what this is about, please register. And you can also watch all the previous recordings, as I said. So thanks again, everyone, so much for joining. And please do complete the post-webinar survey and share your thoughts and comments. And again, thanks for a very dynamic webinar and participation. And thank you to all our speakers. And thank you so much also to the RWSN group for your support and setting this up. And that's all for now. Thanks very much, and enjoy the rest of your days or evenings wherever you are.
Thank you so much, and all the colleagues and I think
Yeah, thanks everyone.